they're here for the right meeting. This is a meeting on the Libby Asbestos OU3 draft interim restoration plan that the Natural Resource Damage Program has put together. I'd like to, we'll start with some introductions here in a minute, but we do have some protocols. This is a hybrid meeting, so there are possibly some folks online. We'll find out here in a second, but we do record this meeting for our meeting notes. So it is being recorded for your information, just to let you know that. And when you do talk, we do ask that you state your name, and also folks online, if you would state your name before you speak, and then so we can get that on the recording. For introductions, we do like to have everybody introduce themselves, for the folks online and also for you folks here, so you know who's actually online. As a presenter sometimes, you don't know who's online, and all of a sudden you're presenting and you didn't know that person was there. So it's always good to know, I think. But anyways, I am Doug Martin. I'm with the Natural Resource Damage Program. I'm the acting program administrator, and I am here with Sydney Stewart, who is our project manager, and she will be doing the bulk of the restoration discussion tonight. She will be outlining what's in the interim restoration plan and also helping with any questions. So maybe we could start over here, and if we could go around the room inside.
Brian Stevens, Lieutenant Fish Wildlife Parks Fisheries Biologist and Libby.
Ryan Howard.
Jamie Howard. Joe Sheridan.
Dennis Sheridan, we represent the Parmenter Creek User Association, Water User Association.
Okay.
Jared Lampton, Vice President of the Cross Country Ski Club. Ben Scott, I'm on the Park District Board.
Okay.
Boyd White, I'm with Lincoln County Emergency Management.
Okay. And how about online? Miranda, can you call folks out online?
Right now it's just me online, but I will let you guys know if anybody joins in later.
All right, great. So online is Miranda. She is our administrative officer in Helena, and she's helping us with the logistics of the online meeting, which we always have. So a brief introduction. We got through the introductions. I will give a brief introduction of who we are, the Natural Resource Damage Program, and what we do. Sydney will go through the Libby OU3 background, as well as the interim restoration plan that is currently out for public comment. It is draft at this point. She'll also talk more in depth about the early restoration projects that were submitted. Also, how you can participate in commenting on the interim restoration plans, and at the end, we'll follow up with any questions that you may have. So the purpose of this meeting is actually, so we had a settlement in 2023 for the OU3 site at Libby. And the state settled for approximately $18 million for the damages to the natural resources. And this $18 million is going to be paid to us by Grace over a 10-year period. So what we are doing tonight is talking about a draft interim restoration plan. In order for the state to spend dollars from a natural resource damage claim, we have to develop a restoration plan that is presented to the public, takes public input, and then is approved by the natural resource trustee, who in this case is the governor, in the state of Montana is the governor. But in order to spend those dollars, we have to have a restoration plan. Knowing that we won't have that restoration plan for 10 years, we are going to develop an interim restoration plan so we can actually do some early restoration and get some of those funds on the ground instead of waiting for 10 years to do it at that point. So that's what we are here to talk about tonight. And we are seeking your public input on the draft restoration plan. Sydney will talk more to you about how you can actually comment on that if you don't already know. Included in the draft restoration plan is also an environmental assessment. So before we can actually expend these funds, we have to do an environmental assessment to assess any of the impacts that the projects may have on the environment. So this restoration plan acts as that document as well. So that is also out for public comment. A little bit about us, the Natural Resource Damage Program. Excuse me. We were established in 1990 to pursue the natural resource damage claim in the Upper Clark Fork River Basin. That was the Montana v. Arco claim that stretched from Butte down to Missoula. That's how our program got started. At this time, we have 12 full-time employees. We have 7 scientists, 2 attorneys, and 3 administrative staff. And we do work on behalf of the governor. The governor is the trustee of the natural resources in the state of Montana. So we answer directly to the governor, and the governor does approve our work plans and our restoration plans as we move forward. The dollars that we do spend are based off of the settlement dollars. So we do not work off of taxpayer dollars. We work off the settlement funds that we got from the settlement with Grace. The natural resource damage law is based under, there's provisions in the federal Superfund law, that's the CERCLA law, and the state Superfund law for the state to pursue damages to natural resources from a release of a hazardous substance. So in this case, there was a release of hazardous substance, the asbestos, as well as some metals. There were damage to the natural resources. We have the ability to seek damages based on these 2 laws, and that's the basis for the settlement that we have with the $18.5 million. The biggest thing that we have to do is we have to ensure that these dollars are used to restore, replace, rehabilitate, or acquire the equivalent of those injured resources. And Sydney will talk more about that, what those injured resources are, and that's where we have to focus those dollars. So that's the focus of the restoration plan and the planning that we have done. And with that, I will turn it over to Sydney to talk more specifically about the Libby OU3.
Great. I'm Sydney Stewart with NRDP. So diving into Libby, these natural resource damages were obtained by the state for injuries to natural resources in or relating to operable unit 3 of Libby Asbestos. So I'm sure a lot of you are aware there are multiple operable units in the Libby Asbestos Superfund site. This is a map of all the operable units. OU3 is the mine site, so the formal boundary has not been determined yet. It'll come out in the feasibility study that EPA is working on. The pink dashed line is the general area. It includes the mine site itself, forested areas around the mine, and then the Kootenai River downstream. So because the settlement was part of W.R. Grace's bankruptcy, we didn't do a full natural resource damage assessment like we might have at another site. Instead, we relied on existing data collected in the Superfund process, and we looked at potential injuries to resources based on that data. So when we looked at that, we found potential injuries to surface water, groundwater, seeps, sediment pore water, sediment, wildlife, and aquatic and terrestrial plants. And then we also looked at the services that those resources provide. So as an example, groundwater is a resource. It also provides a service of drinking water. So when we looked at those services, we saw potential injuries or a reduction in services for aquatic habitat, wetland and terrestrial habitat, outdoor recreation like fishing and wildlife viewing, and then drinking water supply. Most of the injury was due to asbestos contamination, but we did also see some non-asbestos contaminants, mainly metals, in some of the media. And if you want to read more about the injury, Exhibit E to the settlement agreement has like essentially the assessment that we did. It's also attachment A to the interim restoration plan. So the 2023 settlement agreement covered the remainder of the state's claim in Grace's bankruptcy, and one piece of that is the natural resource damages for the injuries to natural resources that we just discussed. So Grace is going to pay the state a total of $18.5 million over 10 years. The state has received about $7 million to date, and then they'll also pay $1.5 million plus interest on the remaining balance through 2032. The cleanup for OU3 is ongoing, so they're working on the feasibility study. Then there will be a proposed plan with the proposed remedy, and then there will be a record of decision that describes the remedy. So because we don't know what the cleanup plan looks like yet, and because the money's coming in over 10 years, we're in kind of an interim period. Remedy and restoration are two different things, but they are related. Like as the cleanup moves forward, it'll help the natural resources, though it's not expected to get them all the way back to what they were before. So we want to know what the cleanup plan looks like so that we know what the final injury to natural resources looks like. So in this interim period, before we know what the cleanup looks like, and as the money is still coming in, we developed this interim restoration plan, and it outlines how we're proposing to use this money in that interim period. As a general process, you might remember we were here in November for the scoping period where we asked the public to provide potential early restoration projects. Since then, we've been developing this interim restoration plan. Now we're in the public comment period, and then when that's over, we'll take those public comments and edit the interim plan as appropriate, and then we'll take it to the governor, the trustee, for approval. And then once that's approved by the trustee, we'll begin the implementation. So that's when the funds for early restoration will be available. And we'll use this interim restoration plan until we know what the cleanup looks like. And then it'll kick us into doing this whole process all over again, and we'll develop the final restoration plan. So once we know what the remedy is, we'll develop that plan, and then we can, it's not set in stone, we can amend it as we need to in the future. Maybe once we get all of the funds, or if the remedy that's actually implemented looks any different from what was planned, we can always do an amendment to the plan. So diving into the interim restoration plan itself, these are the sections in there. The introduction is largely what Doug and I just talked about. Then we have a section on early restoration. So that's the largest piece of the plan. I'll spend most of the time tonight talking about that. And then the rest are other things that NRDP is proposing to spend the money on. So I'll talk about those briefly as well. Coordination with remedy, restoration plan development, public participation, and administration. And then I just want to point out there are 4 attachments to that interim restoration plan. So the first one I talked about, Exhibit E to the settlement agreement, that talks about the injury. It gives examples of restoration projects and how NRDP evaluates projects. Attachment B are the proposals that we received from the public. And then attachment C is how we evaluated each of those projects. So if you proposed a project, NRDP's evaluation of that will be in attachment C. And then attachment D are environmental assessments to meet the MEPA requirement. That's for projects that NRDP is implementing or that are being implemented by non-state agencies. And again, I'm not going to go through those today, but we are accepting public comment on those as well in the same window. So early restoration is the biggest piece that goes through project requirements. We had to build restoration alternatives and then evaluate those alternatives and select a preferred alternative. And then we anticipate that we might do additional rounds of early restoration. So there's a section in there about how we anticipate that going. And then we also have some implementation guidelines around early restoration projects. So diving in, what is early restoration? These are projects that can be completed before we have that final restoration plan. We want to look at these projects because they can reduce the overall time to injury, like help the natural resources recover faster. And then that reduces the overall extent of the injury if we can shorten that time to recovery. And then we can also begin to compensate the public for those interim losses and access to resources. So again, we were here in November. We asked the public for early restoration project proposals for aquatic habitat, terrestrial habitat, and recreation. We got 6 proposals from the public and 2 proposals from FWP. These are all the projects we received, what resources or what category they fall into, and then how much money was requested. I'm not going to go through each project tonight. I'm ready to if you guys want to, but they're all evaluated in that attachment C. So I was just going to go through one as an example, and then we can take questions if there's any about some of the other projects. So when we received all of these project proposals, we first looked at them in terms of eligibility. Do they restore, replace, rehabilitate, or acquire the equivalent of the injured resources? Again, like Doug said, that's like the main point of the money, so we have to make sure they meet that goal. In the settlement agreement, it stipulates that all projects have to be within Lincoln County, so we did a check on that, and that the projects can't interfere with any potential future remediation actions. And then for early restoration, we were looking for projects that are somewhat time critical. By that, we just mean it makes sense to fund them now versus waiting until we develop the final restoration plan. And then they have to be able to be completed with the funding available. So all the proposals that we received met these eligibility requirements. And then we looked at them in terms of our evaluation criteria. So we have 3 categories of evaluation criteria. Legal criteria, these are outlined in the natural resource damage regulations. And they're also in the settlement agreement. Just to run through them briefly, we wanted to make sure the project is technically feasible. It uses known technology and it's likely to succeed. Do the expected benefits to natural resources outweigh the costs? Are we using the most cost-effective way to achieve those expected benefits? Is there any potential with a conflict with response actions? That's response, remedy, and cleanup are all the same thing, kind of flip between them. Are there any expected adverse environmental impacts? Does the project help the natural resources recover faster than they would just naturally on their own without any actions? Any human health and safety concerns? And then can the project be completed in compliance with federal, state, and tribal policies, rules, and laws? The next category of evaluation criteria is policy criteria. So these are ones that NRDP uses at sites around the state. And in the case of Libby, they are also in the settlement agreement, so they are also legal criteria here. Price, if the state's acquiring anything, we want to make sure that it's for a fair market value. Location, I talked about it has to be in Lincoln County. But we also look at location in terms of the natural resources that were injured. So the Kootenai River is part of Operable Unit 3. That's part of what the damages were for. Projects that support the Kootenai River and like the fishery at the Kootenai are going to rank higher than projects that are in a different watershed. Normal government function can be a little tricky, but basically we just want to make sure we're not using these funds to do something that a governmental entity is otherwise required to do. And then the supplemental criteria, these are more at the discretion of the trustee, and they're kind of based on things we've seen at other sites. So we're looking for matching funds. Any project that can bring match funding is going to rank higher. And then long-term operations and maintenance. So these funds are finite. We're looking for projects that someone is willing to take on that long-term commitment of keeping it up. So in terms of the alternatives evaluation, we chose to evaluate each project proposal against the no action alternative, which is something we have to evaluate as part of the regulations. It's what it sounds like. We do nothing, let the resources recover on their own, and we don't compensate the public for those interim losses. It costs $0. This is a summary of how we evaluated this no action alternative, and we do not propose going with this option. So again, I'm not going to go through each project, but just to use this one as an example, the Kootenai River Recreation Management Plan. This project was proposed by Lincoln County. They requested $250,000 to develop the Kootenai River Recreation Management Plan and designate a water route, nationally recognized water trail along the Kootenai River. They requested funding for phase 1 of the project, which is development of the plan, and then partial funding for phase 2 of the project, which is development of a vault toilet on the Kootenai Vista boat ramp. Phase 2 is implementation. They've already identified one site for implementation. So this is how we evaluated it. Technically feasible. You know, we've seen recreation management plans like this before be successful in helping with recreational access to resources. And we know that vault toilets are successful at what they're aimed to do. We think the benefits to natural resources and to recreational access are worth the cost of this project. It's a cost-effective way to improve access to the Kootenai River. There's no conflict with the cleanup actions. This is one that I reached out to EPA about because the Kootenai Vista boat ramp is on the Kootenai River, which is part of OU3, but EPA was not concerned about putting in a vault toilet there. We don't expect any adverse environmental impacts. Because this is a recreational project, so it doesn't have any impact on the recovery period for natural resources. It's not a direct restoration of natural resources, it's more of a compensation for recreational losses. No adverse human health impacts expected, and then it can be done in compliance with policies, rules, and laws. It's not normal government function. Lincoln County is not expected to do this as part of their normal operations, and nor is any other government agency. We're not acquiring anything, so price isn't an issue. And then it's located within Lincoln County, and it focuses on the Kootenai River, which is part of the injured area. They have brought match funding. They've secured funding for other pieces of the project, and they're anticipating looking for additional match. And then Lincoln County has agreed to take on long-term maintenance of the vault toilet. So this is one that we do propose funding. So this is the list of projects again. This time it's ranked. So the Parmenter Creek fish screen is one that was our top ranked project. And then down from there, anything that fell below the no action alternative are ones that we do not propose funding. And the main reasons for those two are just that there was a lot of uncertainty with the projects. So as we move forward, they could be funded in the future, but at this point, we didn't think there was enough information. So if we fund all these projects, that's $1.74 million towards early restoration right now. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we could do future rounds of early restoration. We're proposing to evaluate the need for early restoration every 3 years. And that would involve this whole thing again, another scoping period where we ask the public for ideas. We'd prepare an addendum to this interim restoration plan, and that would go out for public comment. We've proposed spending half the available funds at the time on early restoration. There's flexibility in that. We don't have to do that. It's just how we've anticipated spending those funds most usefully. We're not doing that right now, or the proposal right now is to spend a little less than half. That's because, we're just getting started up here. We're developing these relationships and helping people figure out what projects are eligible for this funding. So again, as we move forward, we anticipate spending half, but if there's like one really good project that we could spend more money on, we have the flexibility to do that. So some guidelines around implementation of early restoration projects. NRDP staff will be working on these projects to different levels for different projects, but we have to spend a bare minimum at least reviewing invoices or something. Our staff time will not be paid for in those allocations that I showed earlier. That'll be paid from kind of the leftovers, and I'll go through the budget a little more in a later slide. To keep with the time critical criteria, we have some guidelines around timing. So implementation of the project has to begin within 24 months of approval of the plan, and then the project should be substantially complete within 3 years. And if those timelines aren't met, the funds might not be available. We might reallocate them, and we may not consider future proposals from the project sponsor if it's looking like those projects aren't moving anywhere. Costs, NRDP can approve costs in the project up to 10% of the allocation. Anything more than that would require an amendment to the interim restoration plan that would go out for public comment and need to be approved by the trustee. Similar issue with scope. If there's a change in the project scope, it has to be approved by NRDP in writing. We'll reevaluate it according to the legal and policy criteria. If it's a big enough change, it might also require an amendment to the interim restoration plan. And then if a project is completed under budget, the remainder of those funds will stay in the Libby Restoration Fund and be allocated in the future. Okay, so that's it for early restoration. I have a couple slides on the remaining sections, just other things that we're proposing to use the funding for. So coordination with remedy, this just means that NRDP staff is going to be paying attention to the cleanup plan for OU3, looking at the feasibility study and the record of decision as they come out. There's a couple different reasons we want to do this. The first one, the most immediate one. We want to make sure that any early restoration projects that we're implementing are not conflicting with remedy. It's not going to make their job harder, and that we're not putting something in that might need to be ripped out later as they're like cleaning the soil or something like that. We also want to be able to identify potential opportunities to integrate remedy and restoration. We've had success with this at other sites where as they're remediating, we can add our money and do the restoration at the same time. I don't know if we'll have that opportunity at this site, but it is something we want to watch for. And then making sure that restoration funds are used for restoration. So remedy and restoration are different things. Remedy is supposed to address the risk to human health and the environment. Restoration dollars can't be spent on remedy. So we want to make sure that remedy is achieving its goals so that restoration dollars can be used to restore those natural resources. And then we just want to understand the final state of those resources, how the remedial actions have helped the natural resources, and what they're, if we want to use our money more for recreational access or more for aquatic habitat, that'll depend on the final state after the remedy. Section 4 of the plan is just about developing that final restoration plan. So once we know what the cleanup is, we just have a placeholder here so that we can go through this whole process again and spend staff time developing another plan. And then public participation, this section walks through what we've already done to reach out to the public and then how we anticipate engaging the public in the future. Again, the interim restoration plan is out for public comment right now, as are the environmental assessments for certain projects. And then any future early restoration will have a similar public participation process. The last section, this is just how we plan to administer the funds. So to summarize what we have right now, the state has received about $7 million from WR Grace. 2.1 million of that was used to repay past costs that were incurred by the state during the settlement agreement or during the settlement negotiations. We're proposing to spend $1.7 million on early restoration. And then that leaves 3.2 million that'll stay in that pot for future allocation. So either in a future round of early restoration or for that final restoration plan. And this is where NRDP costs will come out of. So again, we're not using those individual project allocations for our time. We'll use this Libby Restoration Fund. We anticipate, or we've sort of earmarked 15% of the incoming payments minus that 2.1 million to repay past costs for NRDP staff and administrative costs. We're hoping this is a high estimate, and anything that we don't use will just stay in this fund and we'll allocate it in the future. All right, so 2 ways you can participate right now. Send us comments on the interim restoration plan or send us comments on the environmental assessments. Any comments are welcome. If you support a project, if you don't support a project, or if you think a section could be more clear, anything like that, send them in to us. And then this is how you submit. We have a handout over there that has this information if you want to take it with you. Comments are due July 10th. You can email them to nrdp@mt.gov. Please put Libby OU3 draft interim restoration plan in the subject line so that we can track which plan it goes with. You can mail them in if you want to. And then we have some links for our Libby website and accessing the interim restoration plan and mine and Doug's contact information. So I'll just leave this slide up, but that's all I have. We can take questions.
Nicely done. Pretty long plan.
I can talk pretty fast.
Does anybody have any questions?
Sorry, my name is Ben Scott, the public comments for and against that, does that weigh your distribution of funds? So if you get if there's a project submitted and you see a lot of for or against, does that sway your decisions now as far as how that funding is then distributed, or are those fairly well set at this point?
This is Doug. This is Doug. Yes, that would sway so we are weighing public comment. So for instance, I believe as an example, I think the highest ranked project up there was the fish hatchery,
Fish screen.
or the fish screen project. If there was a lot of, public, comment against that, that would potentially sway our consideration. Our consideration goes into a memo to the governor. The governor ultimately has the final say on that. So the governor's office will also consider the public comment that is submitted and whether or not to approve the plan or amend the plan based on public comment. So public comment is very important in this process.
One other, sorry, this Ben Scott again. So my understanding, when some of the projects that the park board was involved with, there was supposed to be a government entity overseeing the project. But then I believe one of the projects was submitted by a member of the public. So NRD can also function as that government agency.
Yes, so in order for us to administer these funds, we have to follow state procurement regulations. They are state funds, so they have to be allocated for the state procurement. So yes, we can't give Ben money. It has to go to an organization or another government agency that can then put those. So another way for that to happen is for the natural resource damage program itself to assist in implementing that project. And I believe that's the one Sydney was thinking about on Libby Creek.
Right.
Where we would help with doing that project. And we do that quite often on projects throughout the state.
Well, I represent Parmenter Creek Association, right, the users. And what we're looking for is we have to move the creek, our part of the ditch, more or less. We have a head gate. It has to go to the property line and then down the property line and into 3 other customers. It goes through the neighborhood, ends up back in Parmenter Creek behind the high school. So the part we have to fix is belongs to a new owner up there, and he's making us do this. We've been to court, the judge is making us do this, settle with him. So we, Lou actually talked to one of your guys, and we submitted, we had a project. I didn't know about the fish screen, but that'd be easy to do at our head gate. But the project is to move that whole ditch over and out. Well, I don't know if we qualify for that or not. It's
I remember seeing a proposal like that. The Parmenter, sorry, this is Sydney Stewart. The Parmenter Creek project that we evaluated was proposed by FWP. So I don't know if they talked to somebody else in our office, but I don't know of another project proposal that we received.
James,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
This is Brian Stevens. I work with Jim closely, and Jim was kind of the lead on getting this together. And it was a 2-part project. One was the fish screen, and the other one was to do a ditch efficiency assessment, right? Because we have to lose water once the creek's in creek.
right,
So I don't know if you could tie in moving the point of diversion or the ditch into that efficiency assessment. I think the language is fairly vague right now. So, I don't know how locked in we are to what's on paper in terms of that proposed project and the specifics of it versus maybe adjusting the point of diversion of the ditch. Maybe you could help with
Yes,
how
so,
much wiggle room there is.
well, the wiggle room would go back to that one slide where Sydney talked about is it a bigger change in scope than what was presented? And if it is, then we would have to take that into consideration and, take that either out for public comment again or to the trustee for their consideration. So if it is the fish screen is, if it is a part of a bigger project that wasn't part of the proposal, that's out of scope. We'd have to evaluate that. maybe that's something that we should probably sit down with you folks and talk about further and figure out what you are looking at and compared to what was submitted.
Yeah, I think I'll just add that I think a lot of these projects, especially as we're getting started in Libby, it's just the easiest way to do it is just like we can have a call or a meeting and talk about it and figure out what we can do. I know, like Ben and I have talked about these projects and I talked about some other people about their proposals, and so just find out what we can help with.
Help me get. It's been going on for about 5 years. And it just, yeah. And I actually thought about inviting him here, but I decided second, I wanted to see what was really going on and what we could do, so. Landowner doesn't know anything about it. Thus far.
But you have been working with Jim.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, we
great.
talked to him
Okay.
about the project and stuff.
He told us about his,
Okay.
he told us about that he submitted something. And that he thought that what we were doing might be able to tie into that,
Okay.
as much as we know.
We do a lot of work with water users throughout the state, especially in the upper Clark Fork. So, you know, we can bring some level of, we have some experience with that, so we'll see where we are. But please note that it does have to tie back to the natural resources. That's where we have to, you know, we have to make our connection. That's where our sideboards are on the. You guys, anything else? Yeah, well, we will be around. If you guys have any, are there, well, actually, Miranda, are there any questions online? I did know one person joined.
There's 2 people online now. And if you do have questions, could you raise your hand in the Teams?
All right.
Doug, it doesn't
Well, it
look
does-
like they have any questions.
Well, it doesn't sound like anybody else has questions, so, you know, Sydney and I are around. If you guys want to stick around and chat, we'd be happy to do that. But otherwise, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Miranda.